many people who have dementia say things in this wonderfully charming way that they wouldn't have said without needing to think a little harder about what words to say. We can experience this if we're stressed out or if there's too much going on. Like there's other reasons to experience this, so we can all relate to an instance where you cannot think of the word. But for somebody with dementia, you feel that way a lot. But I think in terms of what kind of person works well with somebody who has dementia, it's somebody who can totally roll with it. I've just always thought that, like, you have to create a delicious life for yourself. Like, no matter what you're doing, you have to, like, no matter how awful things are, there has to be something delicious going on, or else it's gonna just all stink. And the more wonderful bits that you can add into it, even if it means just like watching a leaf rustle for a little while, or like taking a really deep breath on a rainy day and mentally acknowledging that that's what you're doing. It's like that childlike wonderment, the curiosity about the world. You cannot let go of that. When you let go of a larger contextual meaning to your life, whether it's just something so small as watching the birds, you lose your reason to live. And I think people decline a lot faster when that happens.
Our lives are often filled with worry and chaos as the media propagates one negative story after another, bringing divide and tension within topics such as politics, religion, and race relations. These stories fuel hatred and confusion while people continue to live in fear. Yet through all this negative energy, many are delivering messages of wisdom and hope, encouraging positive change, and that's something I'm aiming to do. My name is Roger Brooks, and I'm hopeful for our future, but we must be the change and not be a spectator in life, looking from the outside in. For as long as I could remember, I've been fascinated by people's stories. Stories speak to us, and since the beginning of time, the human race has prospered by passing down wisdom told through the essence of story. It's a way for people to aspire to become the hero they know they could be, seeing their higher self through the wisdom of others. What started out as a hobby has quickly turned into my life mission, and as I deliver a new guest each Sunday, I'll aim to prompt the questions you may be thinking, and through the power of listening, I'll allow the guest to speak and articulate their points of view in order to give you the headspace you need to realize your own hero's journey. We are one race. We are one people. Help spread the word about American Real, and together, let's make great stories go viral to inspire, enlighten, and empower those we love and the masses we hope to reach.
This week on American Real, we continue with our Millennial series and welcome Christina Muscatello, who's the director at the Memory Maker Project, which is an art, culture, and advocacy program for people suffering memory loss. Christina and I have a great conversation about the effects of memory loss and what it does to those who are affected and their families. Her project is one that is new and modern. She has taken things that she's learned from a very young age in her career and is applying them into this project that uses art as therapy. You have to tune in. Please welcome Christina Muscatello. This is American Real. I am Roger Brooks. My guest today is Christina Muscatello, co-founder and director of the Memory Maker Project, an art, culture, and advocacy program for people living with memory loss. While attending university, you worked as a care partner for a family friend living with Alzheimer's. Together, you read books, painted, shared stories, and philosophized, noticing early on that the arts calmed this woman, allowing for communication when words failed. After receiving your master's degree, you worked conducting research, supporting practitioners with non-pharmacological interventions for people living with memory loss. In addition to your Memory Maker project, you provide one-on-one creative art sessions for people with memory loss as well. You consult with families to create individualized activity care plans, and you partner with like-minded organizations around the world. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Roger.
It only took 3 takes to get through that wonderful bio, but wow, you've done a lot so far. You are part of our millennial series because you're a millennial, and you've done so much at such a young age. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks.
So tell us about your upbringing. I know from your bio and some of the things that you provided to me in the research that you grew up in a multi-generational home. Mm-hmm. What was that like?
It was like charming as can be. I grew up on a cul-de-sac in Binghamton on the west side, and it was this street where everyone was mostly retired. And then I was with my grandparents and my mom and my sister, and then we would just have, like, if a family member got divorced, they came and stayed with us. If, like, kids needed a place to come for a couple of days, they came there. So there were just always people all the time, and I don't ever remember being home alone for most of my youth and being a teenager. I don't really recall being alone at my family's house ever. And my grandparents are just these, like, really interesting, amazing people. They're very forward-thinking for their era, very, they grew up in a bit of a melting pot themselves in what they refer to as the ghetto, and they'll sometimes have competitions about who grew up poorer than the other. So they grew up, like, on Kenwood Ave and I think Susquehanna Street maybe, and they both grew up alongside of people from other cultures and other backgrounds and whatnot. So they just grew up walking the walk and talking the talk of being very tolerant and accepting. And I think one of the most beautiful ways that shows through in my house is that my grandma would cook for all of us. And if she knew, she would find out who's coming, and we had a vegan, a vegetarian, somebody who was gluten intolerant, later somebody who converted to be Hasidic Jewish. We also have, like, gay, straight, like interracial. There's just like our house is a melting pot, and, like, the people who come to our table, there's always something to eat that is for them. And I feel like that is very indicative of who my grandparents are as people. So it was this very welcoming, warm atmosphere. And on top of all of that, they're also just extremely culturally minded. So we grew up with a record player and blasting, like, Papa, what's that? Papa. And we would have nuts. There's this one. It's gonna kill me because it's so popular. I don't know why I can't remember it, but
Italian?
If I Was a Rich Man, that record would always be playing throughout the house, and we would all be dancing around, and we had costumes in our basement because my family also partook in theater, so we would have like Viking hats on and like bumblebee caps, and we'd be putting on a play and creating all sorts of things and painting sets, and anything went. We could really like express our creativity however we wanted to in that house, and I think that was a huge foundation for not just myself but anybody who grew up there or even spent time there. Some of my really good friends still think about my family's house as the place where they were able to express themselves how they couldn't at home. So our house was just very lively, but I've always been particularly social, and John calls me, our mutual friend John calls me a flaneur, where I just kind of will walk around town and chit-chat with people, and sometimes to get from my gallery down the street to the coffee shop will take me 2 hours because I find interesting things to do along the way. And I've always had that quality. So when I was a kid, my grandparents and my mom would just kind of be like, go talk to the neighbors. Like, you have all this energy and we're busy, so like, go talk. So I would hop barefoot porch to porch and sit and chit chat with all the different neighbors who were retired, and then after some of the neighbors passed away and their retired kids moved in, I would do the same with them. So I had like this one, at the time it was just so normal, but when I look back on it, it was so flippin' special. I had all of these incredible people. I had, my best friend on my street was Mrs. Ellert, and she was 105 when she passed away. And I would go and sit on her back porch and talk to her about everything under the sun. And she was, like her garden had been on Better Homes and Gardens, and she would teach me all about the garden and how to make it look the way it was and all that jazz. And then there was a master doll maker who taught me like how to sand down porcelain dolls. There was a professor who taught the Holocaust, so I got to hear stories about that. And then there was another couple who I don't even really know what they did for a living, but they were like mildly curmudgeon-y, maybe the only ones on the street that were mildly curmudgeon-y, but they also like were very loving, and I'd be out like trying to ride my bike with my training wheels, and they'd be like, "Why are you still wearing those training wheels? Take them off." And I'd be like, okay. So it was this very like, you know that saying, it takes a village? Like, it was this very village-like feeling on my street growing up. And it still is. My grandparents are still there. My mom still lives with them, and I'm 0.3 miles away. So whenever I walk down the street, you know. So it's a very, very loving environment there.
And incredible, and a lot of that, I think, has been lost across the country, you know, for the most part. So it sounds like you're very fortunate to have had that. It still exists, which is really neat to hear. I actually had a lot of that myself growing up, so I could relate to a lot of that with the neighbors and the gardens and the stories. And what are some of the things that stand out to you? Maybe a story or two that stuck with you.
I guess there's just like little vignettes, I think, about, so my grandparents are both extremely good storytellers, and at nighttime, and my mom too, and at nighttime they would come in and tuck me in and tell me stories about their own lives. And my grandpa, I think I was the most taken by his stories because I always longed to travel, and his were about traveling in the FBI and the Navy, and they would just, he has this wonderful sense of humor too, so they all had this wonderful punchiness to them. Like he used to tell this one story over and over again. I mean, I probably am not going to get it right. It's like so passed down at this point, but he was going to target practice somewhere when he was training for the FBI, and there were all these guys in the car, and he said he had to pull up, and he pulled down the window, and he was driving, and the guy said, give me your name, and Tom Muscatello, and the guy starts writing it, and then he couldn't write Muscatello, so he was like, what about that guy? And it was like Vaja Kalambatovic or something like that, and he was like, and then he's like, well, what about that guy in the back? And it was like some other crazy name, and he's like, aren't there any Americans in the FBI? And then like put them through like this. But the way that my grandpa tells it, it was always have this like always at the end, aren't there any Americans in the FBI? Just go, go. And it was like, you're kind of like watching a movie that you love over and over again, but it's somebody sitting there telling you about it. So I think they really gave me that appreciation for listening to stories and catching on to the cadence of them, and then also telling stories. And I remember as a little girl being like, I got to start living because I need a story to tell. Like, I need to do something because I don't really have anything. School isn't giving me enough stories.
And talk about that a little bit. Before we started, you were mentioning about this trip that you took with your friends, and you ended up in New Mexico, and some amazing things happened. So I didn't want to really listen to it then. I would like to hear it now.
Yeah. So one of the things that my mom always talked about when we were growing up were like, and my aunts and uncles too, they just had this like call out west. So I think all 6 of my mom and her siblings all at some point either hitchhiked or traveled or lived out in Arizona and around the West, especially like the Southwest. And as a kid, I would hear these stories about like sleeping in the desert and evading scorpions or not evading scorpions, and getting lost in the Grand Canyon on the back of a donkey at night, and like just all of these stories. And I just remember being like, you did that? Because my mom is like this very cautious person, and I'm like, come again? Like what? Okay. And I just remember being like so inspired by that made me, got my gypsy feet tingling. And then my grandfather's stories of being abroad, I was just like, I gotta go somewhere, I gotta do something. But my family didn't travel much. Like, we went to Canada once, we went to Cooperstown. And Cooperstown's great, but it's not a huge adventure. And then Cape May every once in a while. But for the most part, like, Ithaca was our biggest trip that we'd take. And I love it there, but it's, again, not that a big story to tell. But all throughout high school, my friend Jess and I, we just kept like mulling over and building on this idea that we had to go someplace and do something. And we planned out this entire trip. So the difference between my mom and her siblings is that, like, they had their thumb, and then they raised us to be very cautious, probably because they had their thumb as their main travel tool. My friend Jess and I had a brand new Honda Fit. We had triptychs. We went to AAA and discussed routes. We learned mild mechanics to know what we needed to do if anything broke. We got travel insurance. I mean, we were kind of boring about it. Like,
you had it all figured out.
We were like way too planned. This part I did not say before. I also, I'm a program planner, so like it makes sense what I do now, but I literally made like a day-by-day itinerary with who we were staying with, what time we could be expected to be there, and pictures to give to all of the parents. So like, that's not what my mom was doing. So we get halfway down this trip, and we're like zipping down the country. We kind of went south and then looped back, and then took the northern route home. And we're, I guess we're like, okay, maybe the best adventure to this point is that we broke into Abe Lincoln's birthplace in Kentucky, and that wasn't the way that we frame it, but what really happened was, like, we just wanted to seem more badass than we were, but like what really happened is that that's a state park. It was closed, and we walked over a fence and looked at it anyways. It was nothing too exciting. So we're kind of like contemplating like what we're doing wrong, because we weren't making any stories. It was just 2 gals in a car with a very well-planned itinerary. And we made it to Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. And the name alone is cool and says a lot about what we're doing. We're kind of heading for the truth or the consequences of travel. And we get there, and all of the books that we had read about truth or consequences were all about like like, oh, there's going to be these hostels and there's these salt springs and you'll meet all these young people and people fall in love there. And we were these 2 single girls and we're like, we're going to meet our husbands in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and we're going to get married out here. And like, so we get there and we get to this hostel. I think there's one other person staying there, and it was like a somewhat greasy-looking, overweight trucker who had stopped there and was in our same room, essentially our same little annex. We had our own room, and he kind of ogled at us a little too hard, and we were like, this isn't what we were promised. So we like left, and we started walking around and really reflecting on this. And I was like, you know what, Jess, like, we have this itinerary. It's so strict. Like, maybe this is the problem. When like all the stories that we heard from my mom and her siblings, like, it didn't involve itineraries. That was the missing piece. They kind of just went by the seat of their pants and went where adventure was and heard of something and drove there. And I was like, maybe we need to do that. And I was like, you know, like, proverbially, like, whenever you throw the itinerary out the window, that's when all the good stuff happens. So just as I said that, I turned my head, and there's some dude across the street who was building a fence out of a material that looked unfamiliar. And back at school, we were in college at this point, and back at school I was the president of Habitat for Humanity, and had just started fundraising to build a library in Costa Rica. And Jess and I were both part of that. And so we had a vested interest in building supplies, I guess you could say. So I looked over at the guy and I was like, hey, what you building over there? And he was like, oh, I'm building a fence out of papercrete. You want to see? And I was like, yeah. So we went over and we learned about the whole process. He was working with some native communities to build sustainable housing. It was like very interesting. And we were like, yeah, my friend's a vegetarian and we can't find anywhere to eat. We thought this was going to be a lot cooler than it is. And he was like, oh, my sister's a vegetarian. Why don't you come over for dinner? So we shared a meal with her. There were all these baby kittens running around. They were talking about like doing all of these amazing things with the native communities. They invited us to come back. They told us about all of these like way cooler towns to go to, and it completely changed the course of our trip. And ever since that, whenever anything is kind of feels stuck, I'm always like, you got to write that itinerary, because I do believe that. I think in our parents' generation, that's why they didn't want us to travel, because they didn't have an itinerary to start with. So you got to know what you're getting yourself into and write that itinerary. But then you got to have the gumption to say, and the know-how to know when that second is that you have to say, go out the window and now let's see what adventures will unfold. So,
wow.
Yeah.
What a great life lesson.
Yeah.
Since that time,
Yeah.
have you tried to live by that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I like to say I'm a very, I straddle the line of A, B. I'm a type A, type B kind of person. So whenever I'm getting too type A, I'll be like you need to stop and like throw that itinerary out the window. And that's been a big thing in like business development for me, has been where I see a plan and I can see like 10 years from now, and I want everything to go in this very specific way. And my background's also in education, so I have this like pedagogical thinking about it. So I'm like, well, this should build on this and this should build on this. And then I'm like, you know what? Just like calm down, take a vacation, do something, like go play Frisbee. I don't know, just stop. And that's always when I loosen the reins a little bit. The other analogy, I'm a very visual person, so sometimes I'll just be sitting there and stuck in whatever is happening, especially business-wise, and I'll just like think about a kite. And kites, this is the same analogy but framed a different way. If you try to control a kite too much, it just nosedives. But if you let go of the kite string and you let the wind pick it up, that's the main ingredient, is the wind. But everybody just thinks about the kite. So you have to like let the kite string go. So I definitely think about putting the itinerary out the window, but I think my more like modern way of thinking about it now, or my like older way of thinking about it, is that just really simple kite string idea of like, you want to fly a kite, let it go.
Wow.
Because you still have to hold it. You can't completely let
Right.
it go. And I think that's the thing about the itinerary that doesn't work quite right, is that if you throw the itinerary out the window, you really don't have a framework. But if you just hold on to the kite string and you let it go a little bit, you've got everything that you need. You've got all the ingredients.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your work.
Yes.
How did you get involved with this wonderful work?
So it found me. That best friend on my street who I was talking about, Mrs. Eller, she was a teacher, and this wonderfully upright, tall woman, very, very smart and sharp. And she used to always say, you know what, I don't think that you should be a teacher. I think you should work with older people. You're so good with older people. And I'd be like, whatever, I'm just bored. I'm just coming and chatting with you. Like I like you, you're my buddy, like that's it. And she's like, no, you have a gift. And I was like, nah, like this is just how people are. You just talk to the people around you, and that's it. And I very much resisted that idea. One, because I really believed that this is just how people interact, and then two, because I am very stubborn, and when I get my mindset on something, that's what I want to do, and I wanted to be a teacher, so I was like, I will be a teacher. So, and I guess there's a third thing where I really didn't know that there was anything else. I didn't know, okay, so I love older people, but like, what do I do? Like, just hang out with them all day? Like, am I going to get paid for that? I didn't know that there were careers that actually would let you, just hang out with older people all day. Like, I didn't know that. So I think if I had known, I might have changed my course a little bit, but there was a bit of naivete in there. So when I was in undergrad, I started working one-on-one with a family friend. So I was part-time at a flower shop at John's Flower Market, and then part-time working with this woman, a family friend with Alzheimer's disease. And even though I had hung out with all of these older people all my life and been very comfortable, I had never met anybody with Alzheimer's before. And she had known me my whole life. Not well, but I felt very uncomfortable being a 19-year-old going in there and saying that I'm your caregiver. So right off the bat, I was just like, I'll be your granddaughter. Like, I just kind of fixed that in my mind. I was like, I'll be her granddaughter, and I have a really good relationship with my grandma, so I was like, I'll just do grandma-like things with her, and like, I'll let her kind of run the roost, and then if there's something that she's doing that's dangerous or unhealthy, then I'll kind of redirect her, but I'm not gonna be a caregiver. I couldn't mentally be
so that was your mindset?
That was my mindset. Right. I didn't say that to her, no,
Sure.
but I was just like, I can't be anybody's caregiver. That feels way too plasticky and weird. And it just felt like I would take away all of her. Like, this is a woman that's raised 10 kids. She was like a reporter, I think, or a journalist. Like she doesn't want to be told what to do by like a stupid 19-year-old. So I was like, I will be her grandkid. And so I was going into this blind when it comes to the disease, though. And at the time, I was taking a lot of psych classes, so I was sitting one-on-one with my professor to learn more about people with dementia and how I could engage her more. And just given my upbringing with everybody painting and running around and singing and dancing in the kitchen, and we went to all the festivals ever anywhere in Binghamton, that saying like, oh, there's nothing to do in Binghamton, which is changing now, thankfully, but I didn't even know that people thought that. Like, my whole life, I had no idea that people thought that, because we were like, my planner was always booked. So I just basically used my upbringing as the tactic for interacting with this woman, and it worked really, really, really well. So she would sometimes get fixated on certain things. Or are you familiar with sundowning at all? No. So with some people who have dementia around dusk-ish, right before dusk, they start to really feel confused about home. Where is home? What is home? What does home mean? Where is my home? Is this home? How do I get there? And it's such a heartbreaking thing to hear, because you are home, that is your house, but there's got to be some place inside of them that they feel is their home more than wherever they are. And maybe home is a state of mind. I still think about that sometimes, but I found myself with her, first I would kind of correct her and say, well, we're home, this is home. And if she would talk about her husband who had been passed away for years, I would say, oh, well, I'm sorry, he's not with us anymore. And then after a while, I was just like, I'm being such a jerk. Like she doesn't need to keep feeling that death over and over and the loss of home. I don't know where she means. I don't know what home is for her. And so then I just started asking her questions, and I was like, what is home? I'd kind of throw it back to her, and she'd be like, well, it's that warm place. It's that warm place. Of course it's Glens Falls. And then I realized home was it was where she was raised, and she wasn't going to be going back there. And probably, I mean, the odds were slim. So I started to ask her more questions about what that felt like, and then trying to make it feel more like it was home. Even though we weren't going to be able to go to Glens Falls, maybe we can recreate it or just talk about it, and she can tell me what she loved so much about it. And then the thing with her husband, after a while, like, I just remember this one time. This was when I really clicked that it really felt mean to keep opening that wound. And there were flowers on the table, and it was Mother's Day, and her son or daughter or somebody had sent the flowers, and there was a tag that said who they were from. But she so proudly, she was this little tiny thing, and she was so proud, and she walked up to them and she goes, oh, my husband gave these to me, aren't they beautiful? And I was like, they are beautiful. And I was like, what do you love about your husband? And she started talking about him, and this actually, like, I still get the chills. She was like, well, he's right here, and he's right here all the time, and he's just a good man. He's just like a good and a great man, and then throughout the rest of the day, she kept gesturing to the same spot, and I would stay over there a couple times a week, and I would listen on a monitor as she was falling asleep in the beginning, and she would be saying her prayers and talking to her husband and saying, and prayers are so repetitive, so they stick in the part of the brain that's still there. So she would be telling him things or repeating prayers that she had known her whole life. And meanwhile, I'd be sleeping under his portrait, and I'd be like, are you here right now? Like, where are you exactly? But it really touched me so much, and I just remember, like, a couple little anecdotal things about her. I remember word finding can be very hard for people with memory loss. So the parts of our brain that can quickly find a word we can experience this if we're stressed out or if there's too much going on. Like, there's other reasons to experience this, so we can all relate to an instance where you cannot think of the word. But for somebody with dementia, you feel that way a lot. Like, quite often. And for her, and for a lot of people, they will use these delightful synonyms that are just, or a different way of saying it, that just light up your eyes. You're just like, oh, yeah, okay, that's so poetic. And this actually led to me writing poetry with the people I work with, because I was like, everything that you say is so darn poetic. So this one time we're sitting out back, and she's looking up at the sky, and it was just dusk, and she said, oh, our little friends are coming out to say hello. And hello, and she's sitting there and looking at the stars. And I could tell she couldn't think of the word stars because she hesitated. She was trying to say stars, and then she goes, oh, our little friends, our little friends. And I thought, what a wonderful way to think about stars. Sure. And then she said, and then she, like, sat there for a little while, and we're sitting back in these horribly 80s plastic chairs, and we're both looking back and probably breaking our necks. And she goes, now, what are the stars made of? I never thought to inquire. I was just like, oh, wow. Okay, you're so sweet. I just, like, it makes me want to, like, hug everybody and, like, have rainbows come all over the place all the time. There's just this tender sweetness and authenticity to the things that she was saying that I don't think she would actually have said, and I don't know this for sure because I didn't know her very well before she had dementia, but I think that many people who have dementia say things in this wonderfully charming way that they wouldn't have said without needing to think a little harder about what words to say. So I was working with her and just delighted, and working at the flower shop. It was like this wonderful time in my life. I had like these two loves of this creative outlet and this lovely woman, and then we were, let's see, I very stubbornly decided to go to grad school for integrated teaching through the arts. And I didn't have much experience with kids, and I don't know, that's what I wanted to do. Mrs. Ellert did it. She was cool. I wanted to do it. It was just signed, sealed, delivered. And I went to grad school in the Boston area at Lesley University, and I'm there, and get halfway through the program, and I was just like, I don't think I like teaching. and I think what came out in that was the program was actually perfect for me. Lesley is where art therapy was founded as a discipline, and it's also has a very heavy bend on community arts. And while I was there, I realized that there was such a thing as community arts, which I did not know before. And it just kind of clicked inside my brain that I wanted to do something more community-minded than being in a classroom. So I kind of knew that in the back of my head throughout my program, but I kept going in the program because I thought it would lead to something. And then when I graduated, it was that wonderful time to graduate in 2012, when the recession was kind of like, I don't know what it was doing at that point, being a jerk, basically. And the aftermath of all the layoffs in 2008 was that there were a ton of art teacher jobs open, and nobody told us this, they were rehiring all the people who they had laid off, but they still had to go through the interview process. So at this point, I am bouncing back and forth between Boston and Binghamton after grad school, trying to find a job. I applied to 156 jobs. I liked data. I had this like little notebook that was very like completely dorky, and I would write down notes about every single thing. It took me months and months to find any job. I was finally working at the Discovery Center here as a receptionist and applying to jobs, and that was my life. And I was sitting in my sister's back room, painting my nails to make myself feel like a grown-up, and wearing adult pajamas, because that was the only thing that made me feel like I hadn't just wasted $80,000 of imaginary money on this education that I'll never be able to pay back because there are no jobs. And it was a rather dark time, and so I started looking outside of the scope of ed jobs and looking more into museums and community art and kind of trying to broaden my understanding. And finally I was just like, you know what? I loved this lady in undergrad. She's still kicking. I'm going to go back to her, but I'm going to market myself, and I'm going to start doing, take all my education, so all this art ed that I have. And there was a lot of Montessori and educational theory. It was much more it was very much preparing us to be alternative teachers and very progressive teachers. So I was like, that would be fun for somebody with dementia. So it was kind of born out of necessity that I started thinking this way. And a quick Google search to try to find some things to do with this woman, I wanted to create lesson plans. And I was going to kind of pilot it with her and then see how it went, and then if it worked, try to do it. But in the meantime, I found this foundation in Boston. It's called the I'm Still Here Foundation. And they ran a program called ARTS, A-R-T-Z, Artists for Alzheimer's. And I looked at what they did, and I was just like, oh, this is a career. I can do this. And so I shot them a very desperate love fest kind of an email, and I was just like, please, may I work for you? Here are my credentials. I don't really care what, but I would like to be hired. Thank you. And they actually offered me a job, but I needed a car, and I didn't have one at the time, so I was just like, okay, I can't take this. And then months later, they called me back, and it was dream job. I was Part of the time, I was a research assistant, and we were developing books and plays that are age and level appropriate for somebody with dementia. And so what happens a lot in care communities and in homes is that you have somebody who has memory loss, and oftentimes their reading level is very decreased. So instead of giving them an adult book to read because they'll be frustrated that they can't read it, instead you'll give a children's book. But what happens is that completely takes away the dignity of adulthood. So once you're an adult, you're always an adult, right? Like, we can't, as much as I'd like to go back, I can't. So like, we have things that we're concerned about as grown-ups that maybe sometimes it's delightful to be nostalgic about our childhoods, but that doesn't mean that that's where we want to exist on an everyday basis. We have thoughts and tastes and ideas that we want to share with the world, or we want to read about and scrutinize, or whatever you want to consume information and respond to it. We are grown-ups, and that's what we do. And what we were developing were books that were written at a level that somebody with dementia would be able to read, but they were
still adult-like.
Still adult books. Yeah. Yep.
Very cool.
So yeah. And so that's where I got all my formal training. It was really cool because I got to, like, basically, and I was also leading museum tours for people with dementia, and I was basically trained and paid to be trained for what costs thousands and thousands of dollars to have that training. So I was very, very lucky, and quite straight away I was like, I need to go back to Binghamton and start something like this. I don't really care how it happens, but we have such an aging population here, and there's nothing like it within 200 miles of here. So I was like, this is, and that, you know, I was raised by all these wonderful retirees, and if they weren't getting dementia, they were certainly starting to have something going on, and it would be nice to have something lovely for them to do in their older years. So.
Wow. So what attracts you to this career? And I've been through this with my family. So my grandmother had dementia, Alzheimer's. My father-in-law had it. It's tough. I mean, it's really, really difficult for family members to deal with it because they're not trained. So it takes a really special person, I know, to be able to spend time with a person with this disease. Yeah. What attracts you? What attracted you from the beginning?
I think almost like everything goes back to stories. They typically have these wonderful stories to share, and they oftentimes have much lower filters. So you can get really good stories from them, oftentimes, that are like really raw. And
so it's your desire for hearing and telling stories.
Yeah. I think almost everything in my life kind of revolves back to hearing and telling stories. It's like all I really want to do. And what also makes sense to me about people with dementia, I found out halfway through grad school, which is a terrible time to find out that I'm dyslexic. And I studied up on dyslexia a lot more, and what I realized is that a lot of like my executive functioning can be a little askewed. So my mom, I think, is even more dyslexic than I am, and she really like helped me create a way to keep things organized and plan things out that makes sense to me. But if I don't stay on top of it, like I'm kind of like I just like, and for years I thought everybody was like that and everybody else was just managing better, and then I realized like, no, like my memory isn't all that great. I have a problem keeping things completely organized. I read very, very slowly. It takes me a while to put things together, and there's this whole part of me that I kind of knew but didn't know, and until I was in grad school and had that. I actually went to, this is like a side story, but I just wanted to go to Europe, and I like always suspected that I was dyslexic, and MIT was doing a dyslexia study, and I was like, all right, I'll get paid $3,000 to get an MRI and find out if I'm dyslexic. So That's what I did. But I think in terms of what kind of person works well with somebody who has dementia, it's somebody who can totally roll with it. And like my old boss in Boston, Sean Caulfield, who like developed this technique of using museums as a tool for interaction, he would always talk to me about he's super ADD. And so his brain is going like this all the time, and mine is too. So like it's really easy for us, and not only is it easy for us, it's also how our brains work to go dog, 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 banana, dog, 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 banana. Like it's absolutely no problem for us to run around in all different directions. And what Sean and I have that that people with dementia don't necessarily have, some do, is the ability to tie it all back together. So we can freewheel and go all over the place. And then at the end, we can say, now, let's wrap this up. So you thought that this painting reminded you of the time that little Johnny fell off the banister and got stitches. It reminded you of going back to war and being on the train. Like, these are both like really big, significant things, and it's amazing how much art can bring out these two completely different stories, isn't it? And then, but we have this shared experience, and we can wrap it up, whereas they can't. So in a way, we're kind of meeting them where it's really easy for us to meet them where they are. I always talk about the language of dementia, and I think I speak dementia.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah, and it is really hard for people who don't speak dementia. I'm starting to realize that, because I didn't know that it was a trait or a gift or a talent or whatever. And
can this be taught?
This is what now we're trying to figure out, because I think it can be. I have an intern who is amazing, and a program assistant that I just hired, and we're in the fall time, we're going to be doing a training, and I'm also training a nursing home this year who is just going to be assisting in our programming, but they wanted to know a deeper meaning of what we're doing and why. So for the last couple of months, I've been watching myself. So why does this work and not that? Why do I say it this way and not that way? What are these little tricks that pull people out? And I think it can be taught, but I think
you have to document it all.
You have to document it all, but just like any language, there's the science of a language, and then there's the art of the language. So I think if you are too rigid about trying to speak dementia, you're probably going to freak out. Like, it's a sad disease. It makes you feel sad when you're not able to communicate with somebody. And I think what's extra sad about it, there are some people who have congenital diseases or behavioral things that create a life of a certain level of cognition, a certain level of expectation. But for somebody who's a Notre Dame lawyer who suddenly can't talk, that's hard. It's hard on everybody. The people around you, the person themselves. And the science of dementia is such that the person usually knows what's going on. And I mean, to know that you're losing these things is really tough. So yeah, I think it can be taught, but I think the art needs to be modeled. I think the art of the language needs to be modeled, and you need to catch the accents just right, you know.
What do families do? What should they do when they start to notice the signs?
I'm not even the right person to ask about that one, because I'll tell you what, my grandfather, who helped raise me, I noticed signs in him way before anybody else did. And it was like 2005, and he was driving me home from BU, and I closed my eyes for a split second, and this man who has Notre Dame like education, super prides himself on directions, knows every shortcut. He knows how long it takes to get from one place to another. He is Google Maps. He was driving me home, and I closed my eyes for a second after a long day, and when I opened them, we were going the wrong way on the traffic circle. And I just remember thinking, after the terrified feeling of, oh my God, we're going the wrong way in the traffic circle, I remember thinking, this is something that we have to keep an eye on, because this is a bigger disruption in the day than losing your keys. And when I lecture about dementia, people always think that they have dementia. I think I have dementia. I do. Sometimes I'm just like, I have no idea where I'm going or what I'm doing or where my keys are, and I'm like, do I have early? And it's very normal to feel that way because it is scary, and you want to be on top of it. But the definition of it entails that your cognition and memory problems and ability sets are hampered to the point where it's interfering with your everyday life, and to lose your keys once or twice is not interfering with your life enough to cause any concern. To go the wrong way on the traffic circle is a really big deal. That's not something that you just do because you're like a little frazzled. Mm-hmm. It's something that something's wrong.
Big sign.
What's that?
It's a big sign.
It's a big sign.
Yeah.
But this is coming from the granddaughter. I mean, there's so many complicated levels in this. This is coming from the granddaughter, and I remember saying something to him about it because I was already working with this other woman, and I was like, Grandpa, do you find yourself having any other, after we calmed down and we kind of like talked about it a little bit, and he didn't want to talk about it, and I don't blame him, but I think my go-to response to families if you suspect that somebody has memory loss is actually to talk to a certified dementia care manager, a private certified dementia certified care manager. The woman who helped start Memory Maker, Kim Ivanoski, she runs Care Manage for All, and the more entrenched in the field that I get, the more like for anybody I would just say, no, just go talk to her, because the right care managers at hospitals are different than care managers that are privately hired, and care managers at home will literally just be your extra sibling, helping you manage it in an unbiased way, and always carrying the torch for the person who is being affected by it. So that's always like my go-to response is find yourself a really good care manager.
Okay. So I want to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk about a couple of books that I know you're interested in.
Yes.
First, Man's Search for Meaning. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so I started reading that book like 2 or 3 years ago, I think 3 years ago at the beach. And it was like half light reading, not light reading, and half because I thought it might end up connecting well with the work that I do. I've just always thought that like you have to create a delicious life for yourself. Like no matter what you're doing, you have to, like no matter how awful things are, there has to be something delicious going on, or else it's gonna just all stink. And the more wonderful bits that you can add into it, even if it means just like watching a leaf rustle for a little while, or like taking a really deep breath on a rainy day and mentally acknowledging that that's what you're doing, it's like that childlike wonderment, the curiosity about the world. You cannot let go of that, or else that's, in the population I work with, I see more and more, like when you let go of that, when you let go of a larger contextual meaning to your life, whether it's just something so small as watching the birds, you lose your reason to live. And I think people decline a lot faster when that happens. And I think it's true for all of us, whether you're declining to morbidity or you're declining your mental health, without having a real sense of purpose and wonderment is really detrimental to anybody. And so I really think this like internal search for what's meaningful for yourself is really important. And when you maybe can't quite do that on your own, to have somebody with you to figure that out is very important. So Man's Search for Meaning was written by Viktor Frankl. Have you read it?
No.
Okay. Oh,
I want to now.
You will love it. It's so great. So I'm definitely going to get some details wrong about this, but the overarching part is true. So he was Jewish and somewhere under Nazi territory, and what happened was he was a very leading psychiatrist or psychologist at the time studying meaning, and he got a pass where he could go to another country and continue doing what he was doing, but his family didn't get the pass, and he was like, my meaning and my purpose is my family, so I can't do this. So he was put into all these different concentration camps, and I believe at some point he was in Auschwitz, and so the first half of the book is talking about these brutal experiences that he saw in the concentration camps. And it doesn't sound like light beach reading, but it is so beautiful and heart-wrenching, and you, even from the beginning, you understand where he's going with it, that the people who survived, the people who had resiliency, are the people who dreamed of something bigger than this awful thing that was happening. And the second that you can't think outside of the awful thing, that's when your life fails. Mm-hmm. That's when you give up. That's when you do something crazy. Like, I think there's a scene in it where somebody tries to escape and then they're shot. And they knew that they would be shot, but they just couldn't take it anymore. Mm-hmm. And you can't blame anybody for not having purpose or meaning. But if you know that purpose and meaning are going to keep you alive longer and happier longer, then you do your darndest to keep that up, you know? So I think, and then the second half of the book is more philosophical, talking about how that's parlayed into our lives and how outside of the Holocaust, you know, what a completely dark version, it's the darkest really that you can get to make this point. And it's just, and then he kind of parallels it to just common everyday life. And it really is eye-opening. It's really eye-opening, and I learned so much from the population I work with, and I also try to bring out these things in them. And so, one of the things after reading that book that I started doing, we paint with the people who have dementia. One of our many programs is that we do painting, and it's very free form. No wrong answer. We have a theme for the day, and I say, whatever you would like to, you know, if you'd like to paint according to the theme or based on our discussion or whatever you'd like, there's no wrong answer. And I kind of give little tutorials, but it's really just to kind of get everybody going. And then what we started doing was asking their permission to make prints of it and packaging it very nicely and selling it at our gallery. And then what we started doing from there, because that was an advocacy thing. I wanted people to know that people with memory loss are doing beautiful things. But then I thought the people who have memory loss need to know that they have a purpose and meaning. After reading that book, it changed the way I thought about it. So now when people buy their art, they write a nice note to the artist, and then they get the nice note. So then they know that they have a purpose and that their meaning is still alive. So if they can't identify their meaning and purpose on their own, they're being reminded that they have one.
Wow. So that book has had a profound effect on you.
Absolutely.
In your work.
In my work and in my life.
And in your life.
In my life, yeah. Because sometimes I get too, in like anybody who's trying to start something, you get too engrossed in it, and you are it. It's your baby and your husband and your everything. It's just like it becomes too much. So it also helped me to make a game plan to always have something delightful and purposeful that's not just my work.
The second one is the village effect.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I think everyone should read The Village Effect. The Village Effect, I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote it, Susan or Suzanne, and it's all about that phrase I said earlier, it takes a village. It just, everything completely and utterly takes a village. We just can't function on our own as much as we want to say that we're independent. And I think in our culture here we have this mentality of, I can do it, and I don't need and it's almost like you almost feel like you're being impolite if you say that you can't do it, or like a failure if you say
right.
Yeah, and that's just it's not true. It's not true. Nobody throughout history has ever been as individualized as we are now. We are village, we're pack animals, and we need to act like that. And when you're thinking about the broader scope of life, about work, about community, about infrastructure, it's all about doing what's best for everybody. And you can't know what's best for everybody unless you ask. And you have to welcome in people's opinions, and you have to welcome in people's ideas. And even if you're not pleasing everybody in the end, everyone has to be involved. And then when you simply can't do things anymore, and in an ideal world, it's before you simply can't do anything anymore, you give some things away. And you say, I can't do all this. This is not, I can't grocery shop, take care of the baby, and I'm using like a family system as an example, but clean the whole house. I can't do all of that all together. My friend and I have a saying, who also is a business, artistic business owner, and we have this saying where we say, everything now. I'm in an everything now state of mind. And it's that place where you just totally spin out and you're like, I have to do it all. And then I have a new roommate who just moved in, and I'm kind of in everything now state right now. And he was like, well, is there anything that you can't do? Like that you can just not do? And I was like, no. And then like a little bit later, I was like, yeah, there's a lot that I don't have to do. I'm putting these on myself.
Right.
And then I can give them to somebody else. So like, that's the village mentality in business, I guess, that you really have to give it away. Like get an intern, get somebody. You have to trust that somebody else can do it.
And doesn't that empower others as well at the same time?
Absolutely, yeah. So like if you're always, I think about Florine, who's my program assistant, and she's been volunteering for like 2 years. And I remember the first, or maybe she's 1 year, I can't remember. But the first program that she ever did completely on her own, I said, are you okay? Are you all right? And she goes, I am. Are you okay? And I was like, no, but thank you for asking, and thanks for knowing me. I was like, I trust you. This is just hard. It's my baby.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But the village effect, I kind of took a circle to get back to that. But the village effect is really just talking about the people who live the longest tend to recognize that they need a village and create that village. And the way it plays out in my life is like, I have every neighborhood that I've ever moved to, no matter if it's in Binghamton where I grew up or if it's in Boston where I lived for a few years, I always have my people. I have the weird people that I like don't know them, but they're just like characters who I like see and have kind of created a narrative about them. Then I have like my shop clerk who I can shoot the breeze with. I have my neighbor who I know I could run to if there's a problem. I always make sure that there's somebody that kind of knows my story in case anything happens to me. There's just that feeling that you can turn somewhere if something's not right, and that there will be somebody there. Mm-hmm. We create this independence for ourselves, and then inside that independence we create loneliness. And I don't think it's worth it.
Wow. Well said.
Thank you.
Talk about, or explain what it means to you to rewrite your personal narrative.
Yes, okay, that's a big one. And I believe Impostor Syndrome is maybe the next one, and those are intertwined. So almost all of my friends out of grad school, we completely went off the beaten path. So There was somebody who studied landscape architecture. There was a bunch of us that did education. My sister went for marketing and communications, and I think maybe photojournalism. I don't always know. But we all off-roaded completely. And many of us got started around the same time. So locally, you had The Shop was starting, Bing Pop was starting, Memory Maker was starting, Kapow was starting. These are all small local businesses, and we're all kind of within the same sort of age group. And what happened was, I think we are an interesting generation where we were told, go to college. What do you want to do? Flip burgers? Okay, I'll go to college. Then you go to college, and you get done with college, and go to grad school. What do you want to do? Flip burgers? All right, I'll go to grad school. And then you get through grad school, and get a job. You know, if you can't find one, just go flip burgers. And these are the same people who are saying this very mixed message. And we just happened to grow, we happened to be born into an economy that was booming and graduated into an economy that had failed us. And so we had to be creative, but I think what happened was that we were also the generation of special snowflakes. So we are all the most special snowflakes that you've ever seen. And I get so many gold stars, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you, and awards. And but I think that the good part of that is that we all had this idea that, okay, if this doesn't work, we are entitled to have a job. And I'm not saying entitlement in a bad way. I'm saying that we are entitled to work. Whether these places are going to let us work or not, we shall find our work. And I think it gave us all the confidence to say, forget you, you're not hiring us, you're also really disillusioning us, and we're gonna go over here and do something of our own that we see as necessary in the communities. And I think in a lot of ways we had really great educations to make us be able to critically think. And I think for us, when I say us, I mean my group of friends. I think college did that a lot for us, where we kind of maybe came in with a little bit more provincial thinking, and then in college we were really shaken up and thought about all of these things that we could possibly do in the world. And what ended up kind of coming out of it is that we all, and I can't remember which one you asked about. Was it Imposter Syndrome or
No.
It was the other one?
Yes.
What was the other one? I forget.
Rewriting your personal narrative.
Yes, okay. So I have to start with Imposter Syndrome because it leads into rewriting. So what happened was, like, we all get out of school and we're all just these little youngins, and I look younger than I am, and so does everybody else. Actually, fun anecdotal story, I went shopping and got a hairdo and found lipstick somewhere because I was like, ah, man, wait, I'm gonna be interviewed. I need to at least sort of look sort of older than 10. And I know that about me, and actually I've learned how to play that up, that I look younger, and some of my friends have figured that out too. But unfortunately, unfortunately, we're also in an area here, and these friends that I'm talking about are spread out all over the world, but here there tends to be this this kind of shift right now that's happening, where there's this kind of older guard, and that doesn't necessarily mean age. It's just an older guard mentality way of thinking, where if you see some younger gal walking around that's not suited up, don't take her seriously. And so that was something that I kind of had to fight a little bit, that I wasn't expecting to fight because I was coming from Boston, where that's not the case. And then I got here and I was like, you're not taking me seriously. Why are you not taking me seriously? I don't understand. And what I realized was that imposter syndrome that builds up inside of you, where you don't think that you are an expert in what you're doing, and you don't think that you deserve to be doing what you're doing, and you're just like a Cracker Jack box with like a prize inside, and you found the ring and you said that it was gold, and it's not. And that's not true. We're all these people who have really innovative, interesting ideas, and we're all making it work, and we're all monetizing it, and we should be celebrating that. But there's way too many moments where we're just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. So there came a point. And what's been delightful about that, and again with that village idea, I don't think I would have kept going if it weren't for all the other people that feel that exact same way. where you hear that, you see the great stuff that they're doing, and then you hear that they feel like imposters, and you're like, come again? You're doing much better than I am. And then they're like, no, you're doing better than I am. And it's totally in your brain. And so you get that reflected back at you, and then you're like, okay, all right, everybody take a deep breath, and we're okay, and let's, we'll meet again in a month and remind each other again. And I think what happened was that it got to the point where it happened through lecturing. I lecture about what I do, and it's an hour-long lecture. And it started off where I wasn't talking about myself. I'd give a quick intro about myself, but I could see the looks on everybody's faces where they were like, who is this 12-year-old talking to us about Alzheimer's? And I was talking to like doctors and neurologists are doctors. I was talking to care managers, and I spoke at a national care manager convention, and I could see everybody was just like, why are you talking? So the first 10 minutes of me talking, or 20 minutes, was kind of just convincing them that I knew what I was talking about. And what I realized was, after a while, if I just put in a little bit about my personal story, then
they'll get it.
They'll get it.
Yeah.
And so to do that,
starting at 18 or 19 when you had your first.
Really starting at my childhood, because I think that's what they wanted to hear. They were like, "You're so little," and so this is when I started to play it up. Ooh. I broke my microphone. I started to play it up that I was young, and that was 4 years ago. I guess I'm not as young anymore, but I started to play it up more and kind of own it. And I'd kind of sit beforehand when I wasn't speaking and shoot the breeze with the people, and then I'd be like, all right, well, I got to get up and talk, and they'd be like, you? And I'm like, yeah. And then I get up and talk, and I tell my story, and it would kind of start at childhood, because I think it made them more comfortable to hear that I am still somewhat close to childhood, and then I'd get into the professional realm, and I think it was all that they could handle was that beginning part, and then they'd get to that and be like, oh, okay. The I'm Still Here Foundation is the leading researcher and practitioner of non-pharmaceutical interventions for people with dementia, and I always like to throw that out by the end of my little about me, because I'm like, don't worry, I know what I'm saying, it's okay, everything will be okay. But I'm constantly convincing myself that. So after a while, I actually sat myself down, and I love to write. That's my art, is writing. So I sat myself down and I said, you're going to rewrite your story to make sense that you ended up here. Because before that, it just felt like I was all over the place. I mean, I have edited out a lot of my journey in my career. I've edited out the fact that I flew to California to be a salesman for a student volunteers community service thing, and left after 5 minutes, and I did AmeriCorps. I spent some time hopping around coffee shops. I quit jobs that I didn't like after 2 seconds. There was plenty of things of me, I think we tend to edit out without thinking about editing it out. But I think what is really important, so we might edit it when we're talking, but we don't edit it inside of us. And so I needed to make it make sense why I'm doing what I'm doing and that I'm qualified. And so I started with where I am now, and then I literally worked my way back. I made a timeline of my whole life, of all of the experiences that I've had, of all of the actual work experiences, of internships, of everything that I've done. And then I was like, oh, this does make sense. I'd highlight things, and I'd be like, well, this is helping me do this. This is helping me do this. I've always had an entrepreneurial mind, okay? I have done marketing, so that's why I'm good at that side of it. And it all added up. To what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't like I didn't go to college and say, I would like to do art with people with Alzheimer's. I mean, there's not even a name to what we do yet. We're kind of trying on the idea of art interventionists or cultural interventionists, but there's this is a very new field, so yeah.
Can you explain social entrepreneurship and marketing?
Yeah. So
is that tied into?
Yeah. So the idea why I gave that as a point is just because I think I grew up in nonprofits. Like I went to a nonprofit school, and then like elementary, middle, high school, and watched people present themselves in a very scrappy way. And then I worked with nonprofits where it was always a little all over, like, please, sir, I want some more. And the last nonprofit that I worked with, I remember suggesting to them that you need to create marketing material that looks sexy. Like, you need to make your programs look competitive, even if they're not competitive to anybody else.
From a branding standpoint.
From a branding standpoint, your branding needs to be on point. And that comes because my sister, she was the communications director for the Corning Museum of Glass, and I would be contracted when I was working in grad school to help with different marketing things for her. And then she ran a marketing firm on her own for a couple of years, and I would subcontract some things for her too. So I got this like free education on how to market things and brand things and brand manuals. I mean, these are things that you don't learn when you're creating a nonprofit. So those came in very handy. And the Corning Museum of Glass, if you ever take a peek at their website, they are impeccably branded. They have a brand manual. Nothing leaves their office without it being perfect. And I watched my sister do that for years, and I realized that what makes CMUG different from other museums or from other nonprofits is that they brand as if they're a for-profit. They put their money into it to create a product that's beautiful and that you want to go to. And from a psychological point of view, we live in an age of branding. You go into Target and I'm just like, take my money. Everything is so beautifully branded, but if I go into Walmart, I'm like, nah. So I knew going into this that I needed to create a brand that would be beautiful and accessible and say what we do and modern, but also not, because not everyone that we work with is modern. So our website is very accessible. Our branding is very, very clear. I'm a fool for how things are written on our like Instagram and whatnot. I might not always nail it with the my editing is not always on point. The dyslexia makes me have a hard time with spelling, but I try my best to get somebody to review it before I put it out there when it comes, that just for social media. For everything else, I have people reviewing it all the time. But I think the social entrepreneurs and non-profiteers, there's kind of two schools of thought with it. And one is, if we look scrappy and like we don't have money, then people will want to give us money because they'll feel bad for us. Then the other mentality is, look like you know what you're doing and people will trust you. And I want people to trust me, and I want people to trust our organization, and I want people to trust the process that we're doing. Which is why actually, so we go into care communities also and do program series. So we do art making, we do movie road shows and antique road shows, and we talk about the art and the antiques and to get them inspired and telling their stories. And we could technically get grants because we have nonprofit status through our parent organization. We could technically get grants to do that. And I think no matter how many grants I ever get, I want the nursing homes to always be paying into that, because I think the buy-in is important. That's another thing that a lot of social entrepreneurs and nonprofits don't think about, because we got to give this away. And it's not necessarily about giving it away. Each program that we run costs at least $1,000 to run, and we charge between $75 and $175 for our programs at the care communities, and then we get subsidies for the rest of it. And usually those subsidies come from the nursing homes marketing departments. So we're never gypping ourselves, but we're also creating an idea that our product is worth something. And if we're not selling that right, then we're not doing a good job with the branding, and then we have to go back to that. But it's a very different model than I think a lot of older nonprofits had, and social entrepreneurs, and I think it's a really important shift in the culture.
Yeah, it sounds cutting edge, and
Yeah.
and I'm sure you have some results by now that it's actually
It's working.
working.
Yeah, yeah. Like the biggest thing that I keep going into pitch, and to all the health organizations who's going to hear this, like you get a preview. I basically go in and I say, look, that people don't live at a hospital. They don't live they do live at a nursing home. They don't live at a day program. They don't live in the doctor's office. So we need to extend the care outside into the community. And people know about Memory Maker, and they trust Memory Maker just like they trust going to the doctors. So why wouldn't you create Memory Maker as an extension of your care? And people are like, yeah, okay.
Makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's asset mapping?
Asset mapping is the foundation of everything. My friend Farah in grad school sent me an article about asset mapping, and I read it, and I was just like, this is everything in the entire world. So asset mapping is a tool that's used by governments and NGOs as well in reaction to how things have been done for many, many years. So currently, and it's shifting a little bit, but the current general thing that we do is that we look at statistics, which don't really paint a good picture because the sum of the averages is just that. It's not actually, the average doesn't depict any person. It's a fake person. They're inventing a person. So as a country, I think, we look at the average and then we develop a plan to fix whatever problem it is for that average. But the averages aren't real. So what ends up happening is that we create these blanket solutions to problems that maybe aren't even real problems, if you or maybe they are, but this isn't really going to solve it. And then we slap a Band-Aid on it. And then we say, okay, it worked here, let's do it here. And this is Maine, and this is New Mexico, and we're going to do the same thing in both places. But Maine and New Mexico have completely different cultures, so why on earth would we do the exact same thing here and there, and why would it work? And so asset mapping looks at it from a totally different perspective. Just to dial back, another thing that happens with that is that system, which we're still living in, you create a precedent for how much somebody can make. For example, here's a really good example. So if you make above a certain amount of money, you can't get Medicaid, for example. So, but the next level of getting really good health care, you have to make way more than that. So there's this gap where you're almost incentivizing poverty because you're saying, okay, so everyone needs to stay down here to get the good health care. Like, that's really messed up. And what happens is that people get stuck in the system because it's really hard to get out of it. And then there's grants who specify that you can only work with people under a certain income bracket.
Right.
So then it behooves everybody to keep people under that income bracket. So it's really messed up, actually. And so what asset mapping does instead is takes a holistic picture of what's going on in a community, and it takes a lot more time, but the results are much more long-lasting. So you look at a community and you say, okay, so what do you have going on here? Okay, you've got this great arts and culture scene, you've got all of these interesting people, you've got businesses popping up, you've got some money from the state that just came in, you've got all these natural resources, you've got a rich history, and then you've also got older adults. Okay, so you could look at it in two different ways at this point. You can say, okay, so we've got all this great stuff, and then we've got this thing, and you could look at older adults as either being a really great part of our economy, of our community, as like the wisdom bearers, or you could think about them as drains, because it's going to cost a lot of money to, for healthcare costs, for care in general, in-home care if you need it, or care communities. There's a lot of money involved in aging. Alzheimer's, I think, is the most expensive disease to have, and you can live for 10 or 20 years with Alzheimer's. So So at this point, it's the kind of the crux where you're looking at the community and you're saying, okay, so we have all this great stuff, and then we've got this, which could potentially be a problem. So where it can be really problematic in our area is that 1 out of 3 people over the age of 60 are going to have some form of memory loss, whether it's Alzheimer's or another kind of dementia. And those are we commonly use those words interchangeably, but Alzheimer's is one disease that causes dementia. So there's many diseases that cause dementia, but dementia is that collective of symptoms like memory loss and cognitive impairment and whatnot. So we've got all of these people who are aging up, and then you've got 10,000 baby boomers are turning 60 every day. So if you think about it statistically, we're on the brink of like a big old national concern for what's about to happen. Now locally, we are, I think it's 10% above the national average of 60 plus. So locally, we're looking at a public health crisis if we don't start creating infrastructure, lifestyles, programs that are going to be really functional for people who are aging up.
When you say health crisis, what does that mean?
Public health crisis meaning we won't have the housing, we won't have the tools, we won't have enough caregivers, enough nurses, enough doctors, enough gerontologists, geriatrics. We won't have enough doctors. There won't be enough specialists for the different concerns that people with dementia will face. There's things that you need to have around to properly treat dementia. And without all of those things, you're going to fail. And then what failure looks like is probably a lot bigger healthcare costs because people are going to get sick, fall, they might get like chronic UTIs, and the
after effects
of not being properly cared for of your basic needs is really big. But then on top of that, you've got nobody just needs their basic needs cared for, right? That stinks. A life with just your basic needs, horrible. And that goes back to that man's search for meaning. You can't just have, a few meals a day and some water and access to a toilet. Like, that's not enough. You need to have something more. So what happens is that quality things to do, interactive quality things to do, become almost medicinal in a way. It's like this non-pharmaceutical approach to care, but it's just as important to have it in people who are living at home as it is people in care communities. They have activity directors, but even activity directors are, they have a really hard job because a lot of times activity directors are also being asked to do things way beyond their scope, and then they also have budgets to deal with. So now we can think about, okay, so we've got this potential really big problem, but do we have to call it a problem, or can we look at all the good stuff to create a solution? Instead of thinking, like panicking and trying to come up with a blanket way to fix everything that is going potentially wrong because of this impending dementia crisis. So instead you can say, okay, so what do people, what do we have? What do we have already? Like, do we need to create new programs, or do we have stuff that we can already be doing? So what we've got going on around here is we've all these amazing cultural things that are going on. There's all the museums, the galleries, there's the symphony, the theaters. We have so much happening around here. On top of that, you have the university. And you've got all these students who are itching to get experience in the world. You've got charismatic people who care about the demographic. So let's put that all together and let's figure out how we can solve this problem without reinventing the wheel. You never want to reinvent the wheel in asset mapping. You want to just look at the existing wheel and think about what needs to be added to it to keep it inflated. Whether it's just some air or an extra spoke, you want to repair the wheel, you don't want to reinvent it. So like when it comes to Memory Maker, we are tackling a very important aspect of dementia care by utilizing all of the resources that are already here. So we go into the museums, the galleries, the opera, the BU theater department, and we use the spaces and the artwork that's there, or the performing arts, as a tool to pull out people's personal stories. And the reason why it works is because there's this really wonderfully geeky science behind it. I had a great guy, Rodrigo, and I can't remember his last name, but he researches this, and he said, listen, it's not rocket science, it's neuroscience. And I was like, yeah, that's how you can sell it. So basically what happens is that throughout the dementia process, the different parts of the brain are deteriorating, right? So if I ask you, do you have children? Can you answer that?
Yes.
Yes. And do you have children?
Yes.
How many children?
2.
2. So those are direct questions that your part of your brain that can answer those questions is still intact. Good job. But what happens when you have dementia is that for some people, that part of the brain is no longer active or it's deteriorating. And so if you ask that question, that exact same question, they might say, I think I have kids. I do have kids. Do I have kids? How many kids? Do I have to pick them up from the bus stop? Where are they? Oh my God, am I a horrible mother? And then they kind of like shut down and they're stressed and upset and angry because, God, you're this full-blown grown-up and you can't remember if you have kids, and if you do have kids, am I taking care of them? I have no idea. So what works instead is to use this like amicable manipulation where you, instead of asking these really direct questions, you use artwork which stimulates the part of the brain that doesn't deteriorate throughout the whole dementia process. So the amygdala, it's this almond-shaped part of the brain where your long-term memories are stored, your fight or flight response, your emotional center is there, and the arts are processed there. So if you're ever driving down the street and you hear a song come on the radio and it reminds you of something, that's your amygdala at work, because it's accessing those long-term memories.
So people with Alzheimer's are still able to
Yes.
connect with this?
Yes, yes. So it's totally magical. I mean, it's totally science, but it's completely magical to watch it, because there's a great story. The very, very first museum tour that I ever gave when I was in Boston, there was this guy whose name was Dave, and his caregiver pulled me aside before the tour and said, listen, I don't think that Dave is verbal. Okay, and so part of my training was to engage people who weren't verbal too. So I kind of watched and assessed, and his input was totally fine. Like, he was nodding appropriately, laughing appropriately, he just wasn't talking. So we found these 2 walking sticks, and one had a king's crown on top with like very embellished, and then one was very plain and simple. And so I said, Dave, if you could choose one of these walking sticks, which one would you choose? So I'm expecting a gesture. He said, well, I choose the one with the king's crown on top because it would mean that I'm rich and powerful. And I was like, Dave's verbal. Wow. All right. And then we're all sitting there kind of like dumbfounded, and he's like, you know what? Actually, I'd choose the more simple one, because if I had the king's crown, I wouldn't know if people love me for who I am or for what I can give to them. And I want to be remembered for my character, you know? And I was like, wow, you're super verbal and thoughtful. And then he started talking about the implications of international wealth systems, and
so what was going on?
Turns out Dave was a hedge fund manager. So what happened was the artwork, which in this case were the 2 walking sticks, mixed with the question, which one would you choose? You're giving somebody a chance to make up an opinion and a decision of their own. For somebody with dementia, a lot of times you don't get to choose when you go to the bathroom, when you eat, when you shower, what you wear, nothing. Your choices are taken away. So to offer a simple choice of which would you rather have, even if it's just theoretical, is a big deal and important to all adults. We need to have choices. That's part of being a grown-up. And so what happened was that his aide had been asking him questions that were below him. They were not. They were either things he couldn't answer because it was hitting parts of his brain that he couldn't access, or they were questions that were just below his pay grade. And what happened is that this open-ended question, and that's what we're all about at the Memory Maker Project. It's all about open-ended questions and hands-on, and we don't just entertain people, we engage them, there's a big difference. So in engaging him and asking his opinion, then he's able to access, so we're all going to talk from points that are important to us, right? So I find myself often talking about dementia because it's important to me, and you find yourself talking about whatever you talk about because it's important to you. All roads lead back to that in our brains because that's what we think about. We spend time thinking about it. For Dave, that's what he spent his whole career thinking about. So that's what he's able to tell you about those. That's what's going to inform his decision about which stick he wants, which walking stick he wants. And then he's able to tell you this whole story and offer up very intellectual ideas about why it's important to him.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So the art is acting as a trigger to stimulate thoughts.
Conversation, thoughts, connection. A lot of care partners who come are not expecting their loved one, especially if it's a husband-wife dynamic or a mother-daughter dynamic. They're not expecting their loved one to be able to do anything. And so to hear them talking and sharing stories that maybe they've never even heard before, and to be able to just kind of relax, it's like this very informal support group where they're able to really connect with each other, and then also with other people going through the same thing. So it's pretty magical.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I could see why you get so much joy from this, but it sounds like you figured out some new techniques with your training in Boston and some of the things that you just developed on your own, but some new techniques that we talked about. Can this be taught?
Yeah.
That hopefully this could be passed on so other caregivers can start to do some of this on their own.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about your low-tech life.
Okay.
What does that mean?
My low-tech life. So
you don't have a Facebook page.
I do, but I don't friend anyone.
Okay.
I have a.
We couldn't find it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh.
We found the business page, but we couldn't find a personal page.
Yeah, it's disguised.
Okay.
I don't even look when people friend me anymore. Like, I don't look to see who friended me because it made me feel guilty that I wasn't friending anybody. But the Village Effect book talks about how you can't actually have intimate, real relationships with more than, I believe it's somewhere between 150 and 200 people, or 230 maybe tops at any time. So for years, I was keeping my Facebook page at like 230. And then I was just like, you know what, like people, it gets weird in business because people want to befriend you on Facebook about business. And I'm like, wait. Well, that's my private life, and this is my public life. So I started being very under the radar about my Facebook account. I do not have a smartphone. I had one when I was in Boston, and it was the worst thing for me ever. I had no off button, and I know that that's just commonplace in what people do, but it felt gross. I didn't like the feeling. I love talking to strangers. It's like one of my favorite pastimes, and I'm sitting there on the T in Boston going like this, and I don't even know what the heck I'm doing. And I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I can't do this. So I needed it for my company. They made me have it. They made me have it. They forced me to have it. But I didn't. When I left the company, I kept it as like a camera, and it's like a tablet, because I'm certainly not anti-technology. It's just that I think it's taking over this interpersonal experience that we can have every single day, and we're craving it, and people are craving it behind a screen and then questioning why they don't have these relationships. And I'm like, well, it's because you're sitting there going like this, not interacting with anybody. And
certainly this is the exception. Do you know of anyone else doing this?
Actively deciding not to have a smartphone, I do.
Wow.
I do. I actually know off the top of my head, I can count 3 or 4. I think that other one still doesn't have a smartphone. 5, I just thought of another. And I call it my lifestyle choice. I do not want, I don't want to be texted. I don't want to, like, call me if you need to talk to me, call me. Like, don't send me a link to something. Just, like, tell me what to Google, I'll Google it. Or, like, and I do, I mean, it's hard because I create these parameters that I recognize are completely culturally not acceptable. And so to say to somebody, hey, like, please don't include me in a group text because my really old phone can't handle it, it practically blows up. Like, nobody remembers that, and I don't fault them for not remembering it, but certainly every time that somebody includes me in a group text, I just want to, like, throw my phone across the room. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to have a landline and turn off my phone at the end of the day. I think that would be, like, my dream. I don't like this idea that we're always supposed to be, like, instant McDonald's servicing. I even have a line on my email that says something lovely, like, I'm out in the field a lot doing beautiful things with people who have dementia and paying really close attention to what they're doing and being present. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I'm being present with humans.
Right.
So, like, as my grandma would say, piano, just calm down, I'll get to you. But it is, like, I do feel like I'm kind of fighting the tides a bit because people are weird about email. Everybody's emailing constantly, and I'm like, guys, I will check my email like a few times a week. I check it every day, but I don't get around to responding to it but a few times a week. And you know, nothing is gonna catch the house on fire. Like, nothing that I'm doing is so big that anything is gonna burn down. So I think I still feel comfortable with it. I've been having twinges of thinking I want to get a smartphone because my iPhone 4 that I had when I worked in Boston is no longer charges well enough, so my camera dies too quickly, and because my GPS is really, like, out of date. But then I was like, you know what? Whatever happened to writing down directions? And, like, that's how I learned Boston. I didn't have a smartphone and I didn't have a GPS when I moved there. I just got lost. I knew vaguely where I had to go. I had a map in my car, and I would stop and ask strangers, do you know where this is? Do you know where that is? How do I get here? And I'd write it all down, and that's really how I learned, so it worked really well. I can get around Boston, like, with my eyes shut. So.
Well, it's a lost art, and I think it's a great lesson.
I do.
For a lot of people.
Yeah.
Tell you the truth, I need to improve in this area. My wife will tell you it drives her crazy, and I'm trying hard.
Yeah.
But in this business and my other business, you know, it's just constant interaction. But it gets to a point where it's just overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's myself. I worry about our kids. Mm-hmm. I worry about that generation where that's all they know. And I actually commend parents that are holding off on giving their children phones. You know, yeah. we went the other route. You know, my son had a phone when he was literally in the stroller. Oh. So it taught him how to read and sing, and, you know, so it did have some benefits.
Yeah.
So it's a tough balance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough balance.
And, you know, and I think I certainly paint a picture of myself that's strongly on one side, but I also very, very much embrace technology. Like, I use all the Apple technology to, like, create my own, like, visual things for marketing. I have all sorts of online tools that I use to create documents and branding. The branding side, especially because I'm not a designer, mm-hmm. It's really important for me. So I certainly know what I'm doing with those things, and I think that it's good and important, but I also think it's good and important to not be anywhere near it, mm-hmm. like, not even be tempted. And that's what, to me, we are way too far away from. A practice that I did this, I'm not religious at all, but I still have Lent stuck inside of me, and I like it a lot. So every year I give something up, and for the last, like, 4 years, I was reading constantly psychological articles about relationships, like, constantly. It was just, like, a fascination of mine, and I'm very interested in psychology and the psychology of relationships, and I was just reading these things, like, pummeling them. And so I was like, you know what, for Lent, I'm going to give up reading anything and consuming anything about relationships. Done. And for 40 days and 40 nights, I did not do that. And I realized that I was sitting and staring at my computer almost every night, doing that for hours and hours. And I didn't even realize that I was doing it. So that helped me to become a lot more aware of the instances where I am abusing technology. And like, I don't think there's any reason for me to have a computer at home, even. Like, unless I'm planning a trip or something, I should be leaving my laptop at the gallery, because I don't want that distraction. I want to get my hands dirty and, you know, explore things. I want to fight over questions that normal people Google. I want to sit there and tear apart the nuances of a question and poke fun at each other for thinking that it's one way and not the other way, and like argue about it until an Encyclopedia Britannica comes out. Like that's, I love that. I think whatever, it's like spending time doing nothing, but we need more of nothing.
Yeah.
There's too many answers.
Yeah.
There's too many answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been a great conversation.
Yes.
I have just a couple more questions. What's next for you?
Oh, that wasn't my question. What's next for me? Career-wise or anything-wise?
Yeah, Memory Maker.
Memory Maker.
Where's it going?
So, okay, so this year my goal is to get real funding, like solid real funding, and I think we're gonna get there. Funding that will give me a real salary, that will allow it, that will pay our program assistant and a development person, and be able to really give me the space and the breathing room to be able to decide where we're gonna go now. In my mind, this has always been a pilot, and I don't know where it's going, to be totally honest. I think it will most likely be replicated using that theory of asset mapping, where we won't say, do the Memory Maker project, but we will work with other communities. I have an idea of how that will happen, but I don't want to say it on film. So other communities, and replicate it attached to pre-existing organizations, so that we're able to spread the ideology and spread the infrastructure of it, but in a way that makes sense for each community. For myself, I really want to write about my experiences. I've been collecting all these stories over the years, and what I really, really want to do, I don't know if I need to write a grant for this, or if this needs to, I have a consulting business also. I think maybe this needs to be more on the consulting side. I want to write a graphic novel about all of the stories that I've collected, and have it beautifully illustrated in a very, very simple way. And what that will serve in my mind is as an advocacy and awareness thing for other millennials who are going to be dealing with this. And I think right now a lot of the conversation around dementia is very, very sad and negative and clinical. And it is sad and negative and clinical, but there's beauty in it. And there's beauty in doing the work. And I don't want the next generation meaning my generation, to shy away from participating in that work in whatever way that they can, and to shy away from having relationships with their family members who have dementia. And I think a way that we consume information, that forum or that genre of book, I think is a beautiful way of representing and kind of modeling the behavior and teaching the language without overtly teaching the language. So that's the really like close to my heart project that I'd like to do. Yeah, I think that kind of covers the near future. The distant future, I think, is more about getting it up and running all over the place. So.
Well, it's a wonderful project.
Thank you.
We'll definitely put the links to the website so people could learn more about what you're doing here locally and and around the world where they may get some ideas for themselves.
Yeah.
And but before I let you go, one last question, Christina, and I know you're pretty young, but I think it's important to talk about, and with your book, I think it makes sense too. What do you want your legacy to be long term?
Stories. I want my legacy to be stories. Oh gosh. I was just chit-chatting with somebody, I can't remember who, and I can't remember what we were talking about. But I was talking to Alicia. I was saying something about how something that I liked was very lighthearted and serious and warm but directed. And she was like, well, that's like who you are. And when I heard her say that, I was like, that's the legacy that I would like to leave, is like one of warmth and seriousness and hard work and playfulness. I think the world needs more of that.
Awesome. Great.
Thanks.
Well, thanks again. Thanks so much. And we appreciate you coming on American Real.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into American Real. Be sure to visit our website, americanreal.tv, or search for us on iTunes or YouTube for past episodes. While you're there, please rate us or leave us a review. You can also connect with me directly on Instagram or Facebook, or by emailing roger@americanreal.tv. Now, if you're wanting to find your voice and share your story, join our live tribe and experience our 21-day live video challenge, where the first cycle is absolutely free. Go to americanreal.tv/live-tribe to register. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next show.